Cape Town is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. It's also one of the most dangerous.
We're taking a closer look at a wave of deadly violence sweeping across Cape Town, South Africa.
Over the past decade, a lethal mix of gangs and guns has caused a surge in the murder rate.
Certainly in many areas there is a crisis.
The lid has just been taken off the boiling kettle and it's boiling over.
Last year, more than 3,000 people were murdered here. The number has doubled in a decade. In some areas, the situation is so volatile that emergency services refuse to enter. How did Cape Town reach crisis point?
So guys, we're just gonna quickly do the update of the weekend. About 7 people were shot. 5 males, 1 female and 1 child was shot.
Pastor Craven Engel runs a pioneering project called Ceasefire, based in one of the most violent areas of the city, Hanover Park.
It's happening now, where civilians get shot. Then this can happen to anyone.
Craven and his team monitor gang violence in the district and, where possible, step in to calm things down.
Well, a busy day can easily be like 17 incidents of violence in the area and multiple shots of more than about 60 shots fired there.
The team is made up of reformed gang members.
We started out by using guys that we recruited from the street and we helped them to recover. We trained them strategically to go and help their own kind.
They're known as the Interrupters.
But thanks guys. The violence interrupter is at the front end of the violence, but it must also be a credible messenger in the community and credible with the gangs. Just down here, we had a shooting here about 5 minutes ago. And there, another shot's being fired.
The Interrupters use a technology called Shot Spotter. It employs sophisticated acoustic sensors set up across the area to detect and locate gunfire incidents in real time.
There's a shot coming in here. We can go to the area where it's been fired. And this is how it is in our community here. Shots get fired, incidents happen, life goes on as normal.
Craven's project is based in an area of the city known as the Cape Flats, a patchwork of townships southeast of the city centre. Last year, nearly 2,500 people were murdered in these townships, almost 80% of the city's total homicides.
In other parts of Cape Town, particularly the wealthier middle-class areas, the murder rate has remained relatively stable or is non-existent. It's highly unequal in terms of the distribution of murder.
It's been estimated that there are 93 gangs in Cape Town, with 100,000 members.
These criminal gangs are particularly well organised, but also particularly violent.
They are rooted into the community with a system that's in place.
What's been happening in Cape Town in the past few years has been an intensification of gang conflict.
Over the past decade, this conflict has been fuelled by deadly weapons.
The key issue in South Africa in terms of the murder rate has been the influx of high-powered firearms into Cape Town.
Many of these guns aren't coming from criminal networks, but from the police. In 2016, Chris Prinsloo, a former police colonel, pleaded guilty to selling 2,400 guns to an arms dealer who sold them on to gangsters.
It emboldened specific gangs, and those gangs then started to take on others and rarely escalated the gang conflict to the stage of a war.
Investigators have linked more than 1,000 murders to these firearms, including 261 cases in which children were victims. Under previous President Jacob Zuma, police corruption became endemic. On the ground, gangs recruit corrupt officers who provide tip-offs about raids.
This is taking place in the context of high-level corruption. Senior police officials indicate that there has been some form of collusion between individuals within the ruling party and those in the criminal underworld.
In Cape Town, the murder rate has risen from 44 to 73 people per 100,000 in 10 years. It's now more than twice that of Johannesburg. One study found it was the 11th most murderous city in the world, not including places that are too chaotic to count the bodies. The crisis in Cape Town is the result of a toxic mix of factors, the roots of which go back more than half a century.
Violence in Cape Town also has particularly strong historical driving factors. The city is particularly divided socially and spatially.
In the 1960s, the apartheid regime forcibly removed mixed-race people, known in South Africa as coloured, from the inner city centre.
The forced removals saw them being dumped in Cape Flats and having to establish new communities.
Police rarely investigated the murders of people who weren't white. Their neglect allowed criminals to terrorise these black and coloured townships.
In these particular contexts, you saw gangs flourish. Conditions in many of these communities haven't changed that much.
Today, the area still suffers deep-rooted socio-economic problems. In one precinct, Philippi East, 93% of households were victims of crime in 2016.
You can never cluster so much people in such a small space together, with no economic development, with no recreation, with no job creation. It's a recipe for self-destruction.
40% of young South Africans are unemployed. President Cyril Ramaphosa calls it a national crisis.
Apartheid is still happening in its own way. The whites-only sign has disappeared, but the violence, the negativity, the opportunities, nothing has come the way of this community.
Gordon was in a gang from the age of 12. After spending almost a decade in prison, he left the gang 7 years ago to become an interrupter for Ceasefire. Today, he's returned to the township where he grew up.
This is my world. This is where I come from. You can see there's no opportunities, no privileges, no nothing. The only survival key inside of here is be a gangster, become a drug dealer. At the age of 12 years old, they shot my one brother there in front, the other one they shot him inside. Right there by that hole right there is where I did my first murder. We grew up with a heart of stone, like we got nothing to lose.
When he was a gangster, it was Gordon's job to recruit children to join his gang, known as the Mongrels.
This is the only way to make the game continue, to recruit kids, you know.
But since he started working for Ceasefire, he's focused on preventing children from getting involved in gang culture.
You know, rolling with these little kids, just want to be example to them, make them believe you don't need to be a gangster or a drug dealer or drug addict. You can travel the world. If I can be the example, you know, and show example to all the kids, you know, it will be amazing.
Ceasefire has so far helped 700 gangsters like Gordon to leave their old life behind and become community activists. But there's only so much a small charity can do.
Programs like ourselves and many others will make a dent, but that dent will soon, disappear.
Ceasefire is one of the tools for bringing down violence, and it can be particularly effective if it's linked to other sorts of interventions. The problem, certainly in Cape Town, is that there's been an absence of those sort of interventions. They've sort of been scattered across the city, and so they aren't particularly effective.
South African authorities are taking steps to tackle the crisis. In 2018, they set up a specialised anti-gang unit, tasked with bringing down violent gang crime in the city.
I want to give a very clear and stern warning to gangsters. Your days are numbered.
Last year, with the death toll escalating, they even sent the army onto the streets of Cape Flats. Under Mr. Ramaphosa, the South African government is also trying to replace corrupt police and prosecutors with clean ones. Yet the murder rate continues to rise. Bringing law and order to a place like Cape Flats will take time.
South Africa is continually creating perpetrators of violence, particularly young men who will use violence against each other or use violence in intimate relationships against their wives, against their girlfriends, against their children. We need to do something very seriously about trying to prevent violence against children and work with families, particularly families that are at high risk of this violence happening.
South Africa needs more jobs, better policing, and a cultural shift among young men. Apartheid left a legacy of violence. It may take South Africa decades to overcome it.